Welcome to the Guns and Gavel Show, where Arizona's self-defense and firearms attorney, Tim Forshey, weighs in on the delicate balance between the law and personal protection. Learn about the legalities and realities of self-defense as he dives deep to discuss firearms laws, legal use of force, concealed carry, and home defense training. The Guns and Gavel Show starts in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, folks, and welcome back to the show. I've got a real special treat for us today. We've got two guests instead of one. Stephen Willeford, that we've met before on the show, and just a wonderful, wonderful guest. And I'm just really, truly honored to have both these guys. And Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman is with us today. And I just kind of feel like I won the lottery getting both of you guys on the same screen. I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Thanks so much.
It's an honor.
Appreciate it. Stephen, I've got a lot of questions for Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, but I would just like you to weigh in on this. Obviously, you've got a unique perspective. You've been through a horrifying life event that I've been able to, so far, luckily enough to avoid. But please pipe in anytime you got questions or comments. That's what I want you here for, if that's all right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
Great
you.
to be on the show again.
Thank you. Colonel, we actually met twice. I mentioned to you briefly that I was an autograph hound after you spoke maybe 15 years ago at a law enforcement event here in Phoenix. And then I was honored to be on the dais with you just for about 2 minutes when you gave a sheepdog seminar at North Phoenix Baptist Church a few years back. And I got to shake your hand, chat with you a little bit that day as well. But this will be the first time I've actually got to corner you and ask you some questions and talk to you for a bit. So I'm really excited at the opportunity.
Looking forward to it. Hey, before we start, real quick though,
please.
I'm so honored to be on board with you. You know, it's amazing.
Oh,
you know, you judge, attorney, competitive shooter, but also with Stephen. I've worked with him a couple of times. I want to tell you one quick Stephen story.
Please, yeah.
I was at a martial arts event, and Chuck Norris was there. And I introduced Stephen to Chuck Norris, and Chuck said, "I just play a hero. You are a hero."
That's the truth.
And for Chuck Norris to say that, you know, that's the way I feel. Stephen doesn't like to use the word hero. He calls himself a barefoot defender. But what a humble and good man, and what a pleasure to be on board with him. And let's go rock and roll from there with that said.
And Stephen, you know that Christ walked on water, but you know Chuck Norris swims through land. So
I just want to say, because that meeting was really cool and really special to me, and I gave Chuck Norris one of my challenge coins.
Oh, neat.
And I talked a little bit about the story, and Chuck Norris teared up and cried. So now I tell people I'm the man that made Chuck Norris cry.
Who else can say that?
It's true.
Not me.
Well, and it's so true, Colonel. You meet lots of folks like Stephen. I don't get to meet as many of them. I've had a few clients that have been gone through this, but we managed to avoid the media spotlight. But it is really true. I mean, nobody ever knows how you'll perform in a situation like this until it happens. And God bless the world that there's people like you, Stephen, that literally saved lives, and you're humble and modest, and it's not something that you're grandiose about. And I just hope there's people that appreciate it more than you probably hear.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
yeah.
Thank you. I
Never
asked for it. It just happened.
Right. Well, right man in the right place. That's all I can say about that. So, Colonel, would you mind terribly? I think most anybody that's tuning into this probably already knows you, but could you just tell? I just love the fact that your resume is so diverse. I mean, there's so many people.
Yeah.
I kind of take pride in the fact that I grew up on a small farm as a horseshoer, and I've kind of I now wear a tie for a living, et cetera, et cetera. But I just appreciate that. I appreciate a well-rounded resume, and I think you've got one of those that's better than just about anybody's. Would you mind kind of going off the beaten path a little bit and just telling us your background?
Sure. I worked on a Wildcat oil rig in Nebraska at 17, lied about my age, turned 18, joined the Army. I was a paratrooper, a buck sergeant, OCS, Army Ranger, West Point psychology professor of military science. My book On Killing came out while I was in the Army, and turned out to be required reading, Marine Corps Commandant's required reading. Sold 500,000 copies worldwide. Google Scholars has been cited over 3,400 times in scholarly work. So one of the great scholarly works of our time. The follow-on was On Combat. I've had several books since then. One, I was invited to the White House twice, once to, as part of President Trump's roundtable, and at the time to brief Vice President Pence. In both cases, I was able to give them one book.
Great book.
The book I gave them was this one, to understand what's happening with violence in our society, what the media is doing. I've got my most recent book is on hunting. just released last week. It is the definitive book on this subject. Anybody who's interested in hunting, where it works in, what it does to us, I cannot begin to communicate the width and the breadth of that we took with this book on hunting. Yeah. If you're a hunter, you have loved ones who are hunters, you want to give them a gift, our website is grossmanontruth.com, grossmanontruth.com. We'll get a personalized copy to whoever, and Tim, on my nickel, I'd be proud to send one to you.
Well, so I'll be ordering one later today. So not on your dime. I'm more than happy to pay for it. You earned it. I'm actually a hunter. I hunt a lot less now. I have less time. I've got I have triplet daughters. That takes a little bit of time out of the hunting field. But you're right. That's something that I think that people don't appreciate the overlap there. When I teach my CCW class and we talk about the stopping power of handguns and how Hollywood vastly overinflates that and how in real life people don't stop that quickly and definitively from one shot from a handgun. And we talk about hunting. And then I always ask, is there anybody besides me that's ever hit a 180-pound white-tailed deer in the heart with a high-powered rifle and watched it take off running? And it's amazing that very few people hunt anymore. I mean, I'll have a class in Arizona and I'll have maybe 3 or 4 people out of 40 that'll raise their hands. And people don't understand the overlap there, the honor, the respect, the concept for life. It's something nobody ever talks about.
It's all in the book. But another angle too is, I believe, and I say so in the book, hunting is the single best way to prepare for combat.
Yeah.
Auditory exclusion. Hunters know you shoot the deer, you don't hear it, and your ears don't ring. Now, the only other place where that occurs is in combat. Yeah. When you hunt, you're tapping into a set of primal skills you won't find anywhere else. I tell people, hunters are so much better prepared for combat. Before you see a terrible crime scene, a terrible accident scene, blood and guts, you should have gutted a couple of deer first. Yeah. And you should have been familiar with what's inside a living creature. Right. And it means food on the table in a positive environment rather than this tragic incident. So that's my background. I've trained cops in all 50 states. I believe I'm the only person ever to be post-certified, all 50 states, every federal agency, all of our Tier 1 Spec Ops. I American Board of Certification Homeland Security, a life diplomate, life member of the American Board of Forensic Sciences. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And it's been a good
Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army. They don't just give out silver oak leaves to any old clown. That's for damn sure. So
my war, and you mentioned that we were talking about that question. Tim, my war was the Cold War. Our great achievement was the Russians never came across that border. I came out in 97. I got a son with 9 combat tours, and that kid will see more in a week than we would have seen in our whole career. Yeah. The kids are magnificent, but I have interviewed more people who have killed, and I've interviewed more people who have been in combat that I believe I can prove without a doubt than anybody in human history. 20 years of war, 25 years out here on the road, interviewing our military vets, our law enforcement vets, in a constant interactive feedback loop. They read the book, they hear my class, they tell me what was the same for them, what was different for them, constantly refining interactive feedback loop. It's been a great honor to be of service to these people. I've never done much myself, but what an honor to be of service to people who are out there in the fight. Violence has exploded. Violent crime has exploded like nothing we have ever seen before. Mm-hmm. The highest annual increase in homicides we've ever seen was around 12% increase one time in the 1960s. Then in 2020, we had a 30% increase in homicides. Now, we've never seen anything remotely like that. And that was all the Minneapolis effect, the George Floyd riots, and this whole idea that the cops are evil and the cops are the bad guys, and with the lawlessness, the violence, the price that we paid. We can show you what we call the Ferguson effect. In 2015, 2016, the Ferguson riots and that narrative, how crime spiked horrendously, but then the Minneapolis effect, it went to levels beyond we've ever seen. And one thing I teach everybody is we keep talking about the murder rate. And you'll get this in one sentence. Mm-hmm. Medical technology is holding down the murder rate. We're saving ever more lives. Right. I told Vice President Pence, just like we have inflation-adjusted dollars, we need medically adjusted murders. Yeah. And when we do that, it will transform the way we see the world. Violence has exploded decade after decade, generation after generation, just getting worse and worse. Right. And
10 years
and,
ago,
and
what would have been a fatality is now an aggravated assault case. And everybody goes, well, it's an aggravated assault case. That's a husband who threw a chair at his wife. No big deal. No, it's a guy who came within a hair's breadth of dying, is what it is.
Yes.
Right.
And we see that every day.
Yeah.
We got a UMass Harvard study that tells us between the 1960s and the 1990s, medical technology cut the murder rate to a third or a quarter would otherwise be.
Yeah.
So to compare the murders between the 60s and the 90s, take the murders in the 90s and multiply by a factor of 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And the leaps and bounds of life-saving technology in the 90s are astounding. Tourniquets alone have cut the murder rate in half in just the last decade.
Well, and most first responders,
anybody.
every first responder has a very good IFAC on their belt now, and nobody had those 20 years ago, or even maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's compounded. You talk about the Ferguson effect and the Minneapolis effect, but it's compounded. The lawlessness breeds the way our society is treating cops right now. That cops are like, why would I risk my life to go out there to then be a pariah and have people destroy my life as well? So the hell with it. Just let them go out and do whatever the hell they want. I'll take lunch on my way to respond to a homicide call because who cares? And all the good cops are retiring early, and then we talk about defunding the police. Well, there's no money for training the young guys that are coming in. I mean, I'm just seeing. I do law enforcement training as well. I'm seeing really bad deficits in training just every single day, and it's not getting better. It's horrific.
And time to keep the powder dry, circle the wagons, train, and be prepared. Again, Stephen, at the moment of truth, running out in his stocking feet, opening fire to stop a mass murder. That could be any of us, any day. Have the weapon, have the tools, and most of all, have the skills.
Right.
And as we said before, probably the single best way to prepare for combat is hunting, but also range time and preparation. This is time that is essential. Carrying a guitar does not make you a musician.
You're not Carlos Santana just because you bought a guitar. That's right.
Carrying a gun around does not necessarily.
When I talked to Stephen the first time, Colonel, I asked him about the aftermath, the psychological, because I think I've had, I don't want to exaggerate, I think 4 or 6 clients that have actually killed somebody. I've had lots and lots of others that have shot somebody. And invariably, as you know better than anybody on the planet, it is psychologically devastating. And I think so few people are prepared for that. The suicide rate, the unemployment rate, the divorce rate are astronomical. And I think Stephen told us, and Stephen, if you wouldn't mind again, but I think it was largely your faith that helped you through this, as I recall. Was that not correct?
It was absolutely my faith, and the fact that I believe I was called by God to run over across the street, engage a shooter. I believe I was protected by God, and in the aftermath, I believe I listened to God a whole lot more than I did before, and absolutely, it's the only way that you can really, we were just talking about that the other day, my wife and I, and after I finally was able, after 4.5, 5 hours of being talked to by the police and everything, and they finally let me go to my wife's car. It's really interesting. My perspective at that moment was because my faith is so heavy in my life. I told her, I said, I think I've killed a man. And I said, I didn't want to be David. I wanted to be Solomon. And what I was referring to at that moment is the fact that God told David he couldn't build his temple because he had blood on his hands. And David was known as the warrior king. And but my wife said, look, if God asked you to be David, then be David. It's not yours. It's not yours to choose who you are. You wanted to be Solomon.
You're called.
But she said, I just remind you that David was called a man after God's own heart by God. And so if you're called to be David, then be David. That's may not be what you wanted, but again, remember, God loved David and called him a man after his own heart. But my mind to go to that.
That's another new book, right?
It is. I was just going to double up on what Stephen says. My book on spiritual combat. It's a Christian Book Award finalist. Been embraced across the military, law enforcement, and other environments. But getting your heart right. What does God say about all these things? Getting your heart right. Stephen, the folks in World War II were not destroyed by what they had to do.
Right.
I talk about a balancing act. No pity party, no macho man. Don't go in that life and death event thinking it will destroy you.
Yeah.
You will be better prepared for the next event. You will be a wiser, stronger, better person. So no pity party. If you think it'll destroy you, then you're halfway home to being destroyed.
Yeah.
But if there is a problem, deal with it. And the point I want people to understand is our medical community is very, very good at treating PTSD. I presented to a Air Force base. It was their mental health week. I had the entire Air Force base. I had the base theater full. It was caught on camera and pumped out everywhere else. Had 4 hours to train, as my normal military class is 4 hours. And before I presented, the psychiatrist, the full bird colonel psychiatrist for the base, presented before me. And he said, "We are very, very good at treating PTSD, but you got to let us know.
You have to ask for
You
help.
got to let us know."
So-
If you don't, that gives me a good segue here. First of all, I want, before I forget, you mentioned that for lack of a better term, your database, the thousands of people who have killed that you've interviewed that clearly nobody else on the planet would even come close. And you don't have to answer this, but are those saved in any way? Like, were they videotaped or audio taped? Is there an archive of that? Because God, that's just such important information that people need to latch onto. I just last weekend went to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. My wife got it for me for a Christmas present. Best trip I've ever taken, and I was taken by all the first person recordings that were made, starting with Stephen Ambrose, where they recorded all these folks. And there's all those places throughout the museum where you can sit and watch, listen for a 5-minute discussion about somebody who remembers, Pont du Hoc and going up that cliff and stuff. And you're listening to the actual people that are, a lot of them are now gone. What have you done to document and save those interviews? Because they're priceless.
They are. And Tim, the only thing, they're them coming up and talking to me after a presentation. The only thing I have is I have the emails. Yeah. And very often I'll say, "Hey, I'll give you a free book. If you will just send me an email and say exactly what you just said." Right. So I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails representing thousands and thousands of these interactions. But it's just a matter of refining what you say and being able to say what they need to hear. That can be the greatest help. And that balancing act is no pity party, no macho man. If there's a problem, deal with it. But have a positive expectation that will make you stronger. I think Stephen has been caused to be a man after God's own heart, and I think he's a stronger, better man by what he's encountered as he came out the other end of it through faith and through his own dynamic. Would you agree with that, Stephen?
I absolutely. I have a really interesting story, and I guess my perspective is valuable in some ways because the lieutenant governor for Texas came to me after the shooting and said, "We want to treat you as if you were an officer involved in a shooting. We're going to tell you you have to take time off work. And if the state of Texas has to pay your employer to pay you during your time off work, we'll do that. And right along with that, we want you to go to the Texas Rangers counseling." And I'm going to tell you the post-shooting counseling, and I'm going to tell you that was the most valuable thing. I can't impress how much value I got out of that counseling session. And the first thing she said, she told me, "You're going to have to get used to a new normal." And I said, "But I love my old normal. I want to go back to what it was." And she said, "Unfortunately, you can't go back." And she said, "You'll figure that." She said, "You'll figure that out real quickly." And I said, then I was to the point, well, then what's my new normal supposed to look like? And she said, "That depends on you. And that depends on your support system. That depends on your faith. That depends on you in so many ways." She said, "I can't tell you, good or bad, your new normal depends on how you deal with everything." And
there's
again,
an angle on this too.
Yeah.
what's that?
I think there's something valuable I can give to your listeners here, Tim.
Yeah.
I present psychiatric grand rounds. When docs do in-service, call it grand rounds. I've done it around 100 times. I did Department of Defense wide grand rounds. I was presented at a hospital. It was caught on camera, pumped out over 100 locations nationwide about PTSD. Now, when you're in a life and death event, a gunshot goes off you don't expect, and your heart starts pounding. That is not PTSD. It's normal. Depending on how you respond to it, will decide whether or not it becomes PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
If you try to not think about it, I'll never go to the range again. I'll never carry a gun again. I don't want to see those kind of movies again. If you try to not think about it, you will literally drive yourself crazy.
Yeah.
You'll drive yourself down the path of PTSD. You got to make peace with the memory. Got to separate the memory from the emotions. And one tool that we picked up in just the last decade is this. Stephen talked about going back and getting debriefed by mental health professional. And as you talk about the event, if anybody starts to become emotional, we used to make them stop and breathe. Now we make them stop and take a big swig of water. And the big swig of water pulls you from fight or flight to rest and digest.
So would you recommend that over your combat breathing techniques now?
Yes.
Wow.
And the combat breathing, I got so many letters on the combat breathing. You don't always have water. You can always stop and breathe.
Sure.
But what happens is the sympathetic nervous system, SNS, fight or flight, kicks in. And then there's a backlash to feed and breed. But the act of taking a drink of water pulls the body from fight or flight to rest and digest.
Huh.
It's powerful. A friend of mine is one of our nation's leading therapists for federal agents. Federal agent in a deadly force incident, she debriefs them. If they start to become emotional, she makes them stop and breathe. Now, she puts a bottle of water in front of them.
Outstanding.
They start to become emotional. They take a big swig of water. They regain control. She told me, she said 6 years of college, 14 years of practice, and that stupid bottle of water is doing more good than I've ever done.
Never forget the basics.
A lot of you heard about CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management, debriefings. I train at their international conference in Baltimore almost every year. Mm-hmm. And after an incident, everybody involved sits and talks about what happened. Military calls it AAR, an after-action review. But we've had everybody has a bottle of water in front of them.
No kidding.
And as they talk about what happened, if anybody starts to become emotional, they stop, take a swig of water, regain control, and from the very beginning, separate the memory from the emotions.
Wow.
Moving them down the path of wellness.
I wish somebody told me that at my brother's eulogy. It would have been a lot easier.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah.
That's
right?
a different kind of thing. That's grieving. That's, what I tell people is to understand that grieving is not the same as PTSD.
Right. True.
Survivor guilt is not PTSD. It's grieving. And so a sympathetic a swig of water wouldn't have done any harm.
Right.
But when you got survivor guilt, sympathetic fight or flight reactions are not going in. This is grieving. And the universal equation on that is pain shared is pain divided. Joy shared is joy multiplied. We go to funerals to divide our pain and to multiply our joy. Mm-hmm. I went to my dad's funeral. There was a lot of laughter. You ever laugh at a funeral?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We talk about the good times.
Yes.
We talk about the good times. We remember the stories. We laugh and we cry and we laugh and we cry. That's healing. Yeah. We divide our pain and we multiply our joy. But that's different than a post-traumatic stress response.
Right. And that wraps up another episode of Guns and Gavels. Join us next time to learn more about the legal use of force, personal protection, and firearms training. Show your support and hit the like and subscribe buttons to make sure you never miss an episode. Till next time, stay safe.